Welcome, dear listeners. This is Tess Carletta interviewing Sebastian Nothwell. Sebastian, thank you for being here today. How are you?
I am living in fear of the questions that I wrote. Thank you so much for asking.
You know, you did write them, so it's only fair that now you are the one that must face them, like your greatest fears.
My hubris!
I am going to ask you one that you didn't write because I am curious to know. Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Next question.
No. No, thank you. The question literally says, tell us about yourself or die. So the choice is yours.
This is going to be a very short interview then, Tess. I don't know what to tell you. I've had a good run.
What kind of books do you like to read?
Most of my reading is nonfiction research for the stuff I'm writing.
Your books are really well researched. That's really clear in your work. So it makes a lot of sense that you would spend that much time reading nonfiction.
It's great. I got a bunch of books from my family for Christmas, and one of my uncles commented that if anyone had given him those books, he would no longer be speaking to them. So that was fun. And
But you enjoyed them.
I enjoyed them quite a bit. I enjoyed all of the books on Victorian vocabulary and sailors having a terrible time in the 19th century.
Well, there's an audience for everything.
I sure hope so.
So as long as you enjoy them and they benefit your work, then that's great.
I sure hope there's an audience for everything because I'm still writing books.
And we're happy for it. Which of your books are you most excited to talk about today, and why?
I have so many regrets, not the least of which is writing these questions. I did not realize how difficult a question this would be to answer when I wrote it.
Karma comes around for us all, doesn't it?
I feel like I should say Oak King, Holly King because it's about to become an audiobook, or Forenzo because it's the most recent one. But there is a spiteful little part of me that wants to talk about Hold Fast because no one ever asks about Hold Fast.
Well, you know, I'll ask about Hold Fast because I literally just finished it 2 days ago. I can ask about Hold Fast.
Fantastic. Let's talk about Hold Fast. Yeah, I live in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is, for better or worse, the cradle of the American whaling industry. Ripped to Nantucket, but our harbor is deeper, so we got the bigger boats.
All right.
I'm fascinated by Moby Dick because it's a rippin' good yarn, but also because within the first 12 chapters, you have a meet cute and a gay marriage and an inn, which is always a good time. And the rest of the novel doesn't get any less homoerotic, so dare I say, it was very inspirational. And Hold Fast is, I would say, a combination of Moby Dick and Charles Dickens' The Mystery of Edwin Drood with a sprinkling of Georgette Heyer. It would be very funny if anyone guesses the Georgette Heyer novel that inspired it, but we'll see. And yeah, it's basically what if you handed a baronetcy to a whaler? And then just the chaos that would ensue on that English country estate.
Yeah.
The intention was to write a comedy.
Really?
And then, as I began it, I realized that in order for the actions of these characters to make sense, they needed certain particular motivations. And the motivations kind of turned it into less of a comedy and more of a bloody revenge fantasy.
Yeah. I would say that does come through in the novel because you start it out and you're like, oh, it's going to be a story about a gentleman teaching this sailor how to be socially acceptable. But then it becomes so much more than that because there's all the drama of these interpersonal connections of people outside of the house and all the violence that does occur as a result of those complicated relationships. It's really quite interesting.
Yeah, if you got really sick of reading Georgette Heyer and every single book she was like, oh, you thought there would be a duel? Haha, foolish reader. We don't have duels in history. And it's just like, I know. That's why I'm reading historical fiction. Because I want to have fun, Georgette.
I did have fun with the duel. They take me by surprise every time. I'm like, a duel in historical fiction? No. Oh my gosh.
Who could have done this?
Who could have done this?
Even Jane Austen had the decency to actually go through with a duel. Like, it happens off page, but it does happen.
That's because she knew what she was talking about.
Truly.
What was your favorite part about writing Hold Fast?
The catharsis was dope. Loved that. And it was a lot of fun just kind of mapping out the staff of the country house and making them kind of analogous to a landlocked crew of sailors.
Yes, very much.
How they kind of become Evelyn's new crew once he's no longer on a boat. And just the way all the disparate personalities get to intertwine in this weird little isolated world, because in a lot of ways, part of the appeal of a drama on a ship is they're cut off from society and they have to kind of remake and enforce the society on their own, otherwise everything will fall into chaos. And in a day before mass media and swifter and more personal transportation, because this is not pre-train, but it is pre-automobile, a country house is almost as isolated as a ship at sea.
Yeah, I even sometimes think that's true today, where, if you're 30 minutes from the nearest Dollar General, it's just kind of you and the people that you're surrounded by. So you mentioned that you liked this landlocked crew that Evelyn has going on. Was there anyone on his staff that you had a particular delight in writing?
I did really enjoy writing the cook because she's not taking any guff from absolutely anyone.
None at all.
And it was kind of a personal challenge to myself to write a woman who was not in any way, I want to say traditionally maternal, but who nonetheless takes on a protective role for people she cares about.
Yes, that's what I like about her. I liked her too. I think she's my favorite as well. I like that she has such a subtle way of caring for people.
I also have a soft spot for Sally the maid, who doesn't show up often, but when she does, she is very funny to me personally. I don't know how funny other people find her, but for me it was very amusing to have a character who is so wrapped up in the fantasy world of her novels that she's constantly trying to bring that drama into everyday life. Kind of like Northanger Abbey style.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
But fortunately for her, the house is actually that dramatic at times, so she has plenty of fodder for all the little dramas she wants to act out.
Poor thing, she's just not the protagonist of the story this time.
She's not the protagonist, but she is having a fantastic time.
Good for her. So speaking of getting swept up in the dramatics of stories and all the things that come with it, what drives your storytelling? What motivates you to write, and what do you hope to accomplish with your stories?
The way I usually put it is that there's always been this little creature in the back of my mind, and if I don't feed it stories regularly throughout the day, it will just start screaming and tearing my brain apart from the inside. So I learned from a young age to not let my brain idle for too long without making up something to feed this little creature.
To feed the beast, so to speak.
Very much so. And it's ended up with me today where, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a gay romance. Basically, any new information that goes into my brain becomes oh, what if, though?
That's how all of the best stories come to be, asking the question, what if today is different? What if something is a certain way? I don't know. I think it's a great way to go about writing stories in the first place, especially because you're a guy with a lot of good ideas.
I will confess to having a lot of ideas, and I think it might be just the law of large numbers that's making some of them seem good.
Well, I mean, I've heard a lot of your ideas. And I would say that I haven't heard a bad one yet. So, I don't know.
I think you are inclined to be kind in most things, but particularly in this.
Maybe, but I also think I'm right. So, I'm declaring it. I'm the interviewer of this podcast in this episode, so I get to say it. I'm right this time.
You know what? Fair enough.
You said what drives your storytelling from your perspective, but what do you hope to accomplish with your stories from the reader's perspective? What do you hope that they get out of it?
I want to comfort the oppressed and discomfort the oppressor.
That's awesome.
To what extent I have succeeded in that aim, I do not know, but that is the goal.
I feel pretty comforted.
There we go.
I can't speak for all the assholes in the world, but I would say that if they read it, I'm sure they'd be upset as well.
There we go.
Mission accomplished. Do you have a favorite character that you've created?
I would like to say that I love them all equally, but the problem is Aubrey Warren is my favorite, and I'm very much afraid he will always be my favorite. So Aubrey Warren is one of the protagonists of Mr. Warren's Profession, which is my first finished book, my first published book. It is my gay Victorian romance between a baronet and a clerk who came up from the workhouse. And Aubrey is that clerk, and I think why he is my favorite is because he has kind of this unsinkable core of goodness in him that is always seeking justice on behalf of others.
Mm-hmm.
And he would absolutely never describe himself that way.
Yeah.
There are other characters who are the same general archetype, as I think anyone who's read more than one of my books can probably tell. But he's really the only one who will consistently do the right thing.
Right, and he sticks to his morals in a way that some characters kind of oscillate back and forth. Not necessarily in your book, but just in general. We're used to characters changing their minds and going back and forth on things. But he's very much like he knows what he's after, and he knows his morals. He stands on them.
He might not know what he wants, he might not know what he needs, but he knows injustice when he sees it, and he's not going to stand for it.
And he's the one that, he doesn't take charity well, does he?
He absolutely doesn't, no.
I think that's what I was trying to get at, of like, he doesn't.
It's charity when it happens to him, it's justice when it happens to other people. So, like, He's one of those guys who will advocate for, like, universal income, but, like, absolutely refuse to go on food stamps himself.
Right.
Because he's like, no, other people need it more than I do. And it's just like, no, dude, you live below the poverty line and have done for your whole life. And he's like, yeah, but if I take it, other people can't have it, so...
I just love watching him get spoiled. I gotta say it.
It is a lot of fun to spoil him, I do have to say.
Well, as a reader, you watch him sacrifice so much and work his butt off, and then have all these struggles, especially the big one, that sort of get in his way. So it's satisfying to be able to see good people get their happy endings.
Dare I say cathartic? Because I think I've used that word at least 3 times in every single episode of this podcast thus far.
Well, it is cathartic, and if it wasn't catharsis, the Greeks wouldn't have invented the concept with their tragedies and their comedies. I don't know, they did tragedies and comedies. I'm not a history person.
They did, yeah.
Okay.
They did both of them.
Great.
Yeah, the happy mask and the sad mask.
That's what I thought. Okay. I just, But it was cathartic.
Cathartic is the thing that it was.
So I know what you like to write because I've read almost all of your books. But what stories inspire you? And I'll go ahead and I'll say it. The Mystery of Edwin Drood and The Terror. I could do this whole interview just myself. Being like, hi, I'm Sebastian Nothwell. I really like The Terror and The Mystery of Edwin Drood. Thank you.
I will say The Terror is a very recent phenomenon, so it hasn't informed any books that have been released yet. It might inform things in the future. I'm still working that out. But, yeah, I was inspired by a lot of 19th century fiction and kind of the limitations of the time and place in which it was created, meaning that it was difficult to get overt queer content.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to read between the lines and dig into some author biographies and read some private correspondence to put together all the clues. And then sometimes it's just a matter of, like, a cishet author in the 19th century perhaps not even realizing that what they're writing rings so very true to a certain subset of the population they may or may not know exists.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might be the case with The Mystery of Edwin Drood, almost certainly. I'm pretty sure in Moby Dick's case, Herman Melville was doing it on purpose because he was working through a lot of feelings.
Aren't we all?
For more on those feelings, read Hero, Captain, and Stranger by Robert K. Martin, which is a work of literary criticism examining the homoerotic themes throughout Herman Melville's career and how they do or do not relate to the author's private life. And then, until very recently, I would have told you I was inspired most by stories that disappointed me. Because my approach to that has always been like, this story could have been perfect. This story had so many things I liked in it, except it was missing this one thing, and that one thing is usually gay romance. But sometimes that one thing becomes multiple things. It's like, it was missing gay romance, and also it was missing, some upset of the status quo. Because coming back to Georgette Heyer, it feels at best arrogant to say her work was missing something, but I think it's at this point very well known that not only was she deeply anti-Semitic, but also extremely classist to the point where it hampered her own storytelling because there are several of her quote unquote mysteries where once you know she hates poor people, you know from page one who done it.
Yeah.
It was the poor person.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of any logic, of any motivation, of any consistency within the narrative itself, the answer will always be the poor person did it because she just hated the working class that much. The only thing she hated more than the working class were middle class people trying to attain more wealth. Any attempt by anyone to better themselves beyond what she considered quote unquote their place, instant villain in her eyes. So a lot of fun for me is taking Georgette Heyer archetypes or frameworks and just kind of reconfiguring them until they make sense to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I've usually added elves and dragons, so it's not always super recognizable as what it once was. But
Which is honestly for the best.
in some cases, I've just added a whaler, so we'll see.
But I think that's something that is really common for everyone that's involved in this podcast is overarchingly, we like to read about queer people finding whatever happiness is to them. And a lot of us, I think, have landed in cozy fantasy because the thing that is missing, like you said, like you really, really liked it, but there was just one little thing that was disappointing. So that's what I like about your work. Especially Oak King, Holly King, and Fiorenzo, where they're dealing in queer normative societies where they can not have to worry about that for once, you know?
I do find it kind of a delicate balance writing queer normative books because, like, I have a great deal of respect for the actual history and the history of queer people who have been here the whole time. Thank you for noticing. And the fact that we were able to survive for so long on the fringes of society, some more openly than others, and how, yes, there was persecution, yes, there was hate, yes, there was death, yes, there was violence, but also we continued to persist, we continued to find our own way, we continued to find each other, and we continued to carve out what happily ever afters we could.
Yeah.
And so, for that reason, my historicals don't take place in queer-normative worlds. They take place in worlds with a standard amount of homophobia and queerphobia and transphobia.
Court regulated homophobia.
And then Oak King Holly King was the first one to kind of straddle that line with Ren Lofthouse, a Victorian clerk who comes from a Victorian era that is almost identical to the one from actual history in terms of its homophobia and its bigotry that he has to contend with as a queer man. But he also has access to the Fae realm, which is, as you said, a queer normative fantasy setting where the Fae are just like, gender is a fun hat, and consenting adults should do whatever they want with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, who gives a shit? And it was kind of fun to write a little escape for this Victorian man into almost like the Greenwood from E.M. Forster's Morris.
Yeah.
It's also like, I want to write queer-normative worlds to give queer readers a break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From the things they have to deal with every day. The things we're all going through every day with that. But, like, I am concerned about queer normative worlds as making queer pain more palatable for cishet people by just pretending it didn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't really like. So it's like straddling that line between escapist fantasy for the oppressed versus making the oppressors feel better by pretending the oppression never happened. Sorry, we got way off track.
We did, but what I wanted to say about all of this is that the value of your work, the whole catalog of it, and the value of other queer authors is that, you know, your bookshelf has plenty of room for all the different types of stories. So there's room for the Oak Kings and Holly Kings of the world where you get to experience the escape from homophobia, and then there's room for your other novels that talk about the history and honor that history. And I think altogether, all of your books tell a story, tell the message that basically you just told me and told the listeners. So
the rambling, incoherent message question mark that you just gave.
I got it. If I got it, they got it.
Returning to Fiorenzo, that queer normative world is completely ahistorical. It takes place entirely in a fantasy world. It's not like a historical world with a portal to a fantasy world like in Oak King, Holly King. It's entirely fantastical from the ground up. And yeah, it is based in many ways in the historical 18th century Venice, but I feel like I need to edit the historical note at the front of the book because I don't think I made it clear enough just how fantasy it is. Because I have heard back from some readers, it's just like, oh, it's cool how you've reimagined what Venetian society could look like with a stronger Roman influence, with less like homophobia and sexism. And it's just like,
And dragons.
the Romans were also homophobic and sexist. Like, there was like a kind of continuation from ancient Roman society into 18th century Italy. Like, yes, they went from worshipping Zeus to worshipping Jesus, but that really didn't change a whole lot in terms of the core attitudes towards queer people and women.
No.
And also, historically speaking, Venice was never pagan, so jot that down.
But to summarize that for the beginning of your book, it essentially just says, this is a whole new world. This is not Italy. Goodbye. And that's what it says.
It's just a long, long list of all the things I changed on purpose, which is most of the things. But I do have a soft spot for 18th century menswear and Baroque music and the convenience of gondola travel. So all of that remains.
As it should. If there's things in history we're going to leave behind, I think the fashion and the gondolas should get to stay.
Bring back 18th century menswear. That's what I've been saying.
I'll start the petition. I'll be the first one to sign it. Bring back 18th century menswear. Thank you. Signed me. So you mentioning what you like to write in that story kind of brings this into the next question, which is, what are some themes you love to explore and revisit in your writing?
So it's never been anything I do on purpose. But it feels like with every story I write, I get to a certain point in the manuscript and I look at it and I have to throw my hands in the air and go, fuck, it's about body autonomy again. God damn it. Every day it's like this. Every single stupid thing I write boils down to body autonomy, and I don't know how to tell a different story. So if that's what you're into, good news. I have it in spades.
Is it that you write every story about body autonomy, or is it that every story is about body autonomy?
I think it's the first one.
I think you can make a strong argument for the second one. I think you could if you tried. I was trying to help you out there.
There's no help for me, Tess. Save yourself.
Pride and Prejudice, body autonomy.
Go on without me. Live your life.
Moby Dick, body autonomy.
I mean, kind of.
That's what I'm saying.
The captain exerting his will over the very bodies of the crew as they become just cogs in the capitalist machine of death.
There you go. Thank you for proving my point. Any classic novel, Jane Eyre, body autonomy. Thank you.
But yeah, it all comes down to body autonomy. In one way or another, whether your body gets crunched up in the capitalist machine or whether your body is sacrificed for some religious or spiritual purpose on others' behalf, or in the most literal case, if your body becomes transactional for sex, it's all body autonomy and people should have it. And the story is they start out not having it and then by the end of the book they get it. So it's a happily ever after.
Well, I just love that.
Something queer history, something the state trying to impose its laws on people's bodies, something gay sex.
Yeah, you're cooking. You're cooking with gas.
This has been my thesis defense. I will be accepting my master's degree shortly.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
But yeah, body autonomy is the most consistent theme. I'd say that and the old horror standby of, would that be fucked up or what? And usually the answer is, yeah, dude, that would be fucked up. And I'm like, I know, thank you for reading.
The end. Again, I say unto you, what drew you to your subgenres?
Am queer.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy reading about self and seeing self in fiction.
Of course.
Enjoy happy endings.
Retweet.
The only genre of fiction that requires a happily ever after is romance.
Hell yeah.
And it's very difficult to write a romance where it's plausibly deniable whether or not the leads are in love with each other. So you really can't queerbait, and you really can't kill off one of them at the end of it. So if I want to see queer people undeniably queer, undeniably in love, and undeniably happily ever after, I gotta be in queer romance, dude. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I think if you ventured into tragedy for the main couple at all, then it becomes a drama. I'm just thinking about the technicalities of the genre.
I think you could argue I put my characters through a lot, but by the end of it, they're happy.
What was that thing you just posted on Instagram? It was like angst, 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 angst. But happily ever after at the end.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
That was from the Blue Sky account Unhinged AO3 tags, which scrapes tags from Archive of Our Own and reposts them devoid of context. And one of the tags was angst, 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 and then happily ever after because I'm not a monster. And you know what? I stand by that. They're not my words, but I live by them.
I think that's a common theme for all of us involved in this podcast. Some more than others. Looking at you, specifically.
What about me?
You're the one in the group that we go, do Sebastian's books count as cozy romance? And I always say yes. And you always say no.
Well,
and I think that says something about your work.
There's a lot of grievous bodily harm vividly described on the page for cozy, you know?
You know what I'm gonna say. Like, my book starts with euthanasia, so what of it?
That's true. But the rest of it, very cozy.
Well, after the bodily harm is done being committed, so to speak, then there's a lot of comfort in your books. Cozy. I think this is a whole podcast episode idea that we have, so we can't spoil it too much. But my thesis statement for that argument is that Sebastian Nothwell's books are in fact cozy, and this is a hill I will die on. Thank you. God bless. Amen.
After Redacted survives a close-range steam boiler explosion, it's very cozy. He gets better.
After Redacted gets shot in a duel where he was yielding and then just took a bullet for his lover. After Redacted gets appendicitis and has to have Victorian surgery. It's cozy, y'all.
It's so cozy.
Okay, so the last question. What advice do you have for aspiring authors?
Just fucking do it. Which is such bullshit advice because it's impossible to follow, but also yeah, just do it. Just start writing. Just tie your shoelaces to your desk legs and keep yourself in the chair and unplug your router and just get words out however you have to.
Unplug your router? How do you look stuff up if you've unplugged your router?
You don't.
Oh, I don't like that.
You just put brackets, insert correct word and or description here, and then you keep writing. You just keep going.
Well, if you're an aspiring author, go after your routers first. You've heard it here.
Smash your routers with hammers. Liberate yourself.
Don't smash your routers with hammers. You need those.
No? Okay.
How are you going to market your book and post it on all the distributing websites if you don't have a router?
Library.
I was going to say that's what the public library is for.
Yeah, that's why Jesus invented public libraries.
My goodness.
Jesus and or Benjamin Franklin. I always get them mixed up.
You always get them mixed up. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners before we wrap up?
Please continue listening to the podcast even after this episode. I promise I won't be a guest anymore. I'll just interview people.
Hey now. No, none of that. Okay, I will say people should listen to the podcast because then you get the group dynamic, and that is where the shenanigans begin. We are shenaniganing again and again.
I cannot wait for our What is Cozy episode.
Oh, the soapbox is ready. My feet hover above it, ready to step upon it.
I will have a PowerPoint, the likes of which you've never seen.
That would be really funny to do PowerPoint night and be like... Okay, and also, here's the thing, everyone, is that I'm a library worker, so I'm good at research. And Sebastian, through the nature of his work, is good at research. So I feel like our PowerPoints would have like 27 reference slides. And be like, according to this literary critic, Sebastian's books are indeed cozy. Thank you.
I will bring you cozy, the likes of which you could never have dreamed of. You're not ready for this cozy.
Oh, when we do get to the cozy episode, be sure to listen to the point about manual labor.
Yes. Honestly, the manual labor is probably the key point. It's really the only criteria we need, in my opinion, but...
Okay. Anyway, this has been Right Here, Right Queer with Sebastian Nothwell and Tess Carletta. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Tess, for being here, for interviewing me, for letting me stay on the podcast.
You're so fucking welcome.
Au reservoir.